Okay, well, I'll go ahead and introduce us. So, for the recording, my name is Greg Staninger. I'm one of the board members. I'm also on the healing team that sponsored this meeting. We initially started this with the idea of transitions, and we've had a review of transitions in relation to retirement, which is more what I'm about. But this we decided was, hey, there are transitions that are also for those in their uh, early teens, 20s, and beyond that are interested in those transitions from to out of college and into marriage and into all those things that'll be introduced here shortly. And so we asked Lee Gordon to lead this time, and he agreed to that and has pulled together this team of experts at being young and transitions. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to him and his team. And for the sake of those that are in the recording, you can please listen to the end for all the wisdom that will be presented. So with that, I'll turn that over to Lee. And thanks very much for hosting this.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thanks, Craig. So yeah, we are excited to get to talk about transitions. I think we all get to live in a lot of transitions, and sometimes that can be a difficult time in life, just learning how to navigate those, and even because we're getting to mourn what we're leaving, but celebrate what we're moving into. And so I'm excited for our panel to get to discuss some testimonies of how God has gotten to work in and through those transitions. And my hope is that each one listening will be able to glean some wisdom as we get to talk through it. But I'm going to introduce people who are going to be speaking. So we've got Daryn Williams. He's a product owner at Allied Bank in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's been married to his wife, Lauren, just over 5 years. They have 3 beautiful kids. Daryn moved to Charlotte about 9 years ago with a few friends to start a church at UNC Charlotte. And my wife and I know Daryn and his family quite well. Daryn was actually the MC at my wedding. That was really fun.
Oh, I forgot about that.
And one thing that you'll know as you get to talk to Daryn, very quickly you'll see his joy, but also his love for God and how important that is to him. So I'm excited, Daryn Williams, that you're here. And then we've got Carlos Cardona, who hails from Miami, Florida. He is on staff with the Rock Miami. He's been full-time the last 4 years. He's married, also been married just about 5 years. His wife, Jessie, they've got 2 little ones. Carlos has an incredible testimony of just how God's transformed his life from being deeply rooted in kind of the music scene to where God's kind of transformed his life to a place where he sees the value and the worth that he is as a child of God. And so I'm excited. He's going to get to share on what it looks like. We actually got to become dads about the similar time. And so we got to step into that season together. So I'm excited to get to hear from him. Then we've got Chrissian Potter. He is from Jacksonville. He's the director of their college and young professional group at Awaken Church. He creates content for their digital presence for their church. And I've gotten to be around Chrissian largely through our retreats and even mission trips, getting to see his love and passion for caring for people, for making sure people are on the same page and united. And he just got married 6 months ago. And so he's going to get to share about how that transition has been and how God's been challenging him this last year. And just real quick, I'm Lee Gordon. I am a pastor here in Tallahassee, Florida. I've been pastor for around 5 years and been married about 5 years. We've got 3 kiddos here. And I studied civil engineering, worked as a civil engineer for 3 years, then transitioned to being on staff. And I'll get to share a little bit more about that. And yeah, I think transitions are a huge part of life, and sometimes we can run into and feel like they're walls. I feel like, oh man, I've got to restart. But I think I'm pretty excited to see how, as we get to hear testimony and get to hear how God's been moving in those transitions, how God can use those to challenge and grow us. So we are going to jump in. We broke it down to 4 transitions, and that's kind of the transitions we're going to talk about. We'll go through the different transitions, and I'll have different people share their experiences, their testimony, and then towards the end, we'll have a time of questions. There are. So first transition, we're going to go from moving to a new city. So going from one city to a new city. Then we'll look at going from one job to a new job. We'll look at going from single to married, and then from married to having kids. And I think all of those, there's some exciting parts. There's also some difficult parts. And there's risk and uncertainty in all of them. So I'm excited to get to hear from our panelists. So we're going to jump into moving to a new city. And I mentioned it in his intro, but Daryn Williams is going to share. Could you share how, maybe a summary of what your move was? Like, where did you go? Where did you come? Or like, where did you land?
Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from? Daryn Williams. Anyway, so yeah, as Lee mentioned, moved to Charlotte here, Charlotte, North Carolina, about 9 years ago. And I say we, there are about 5 of us originally, and then turned into 12 total people. But moved from Raleigh area. I'm going to say mostly Raleigh, but we had a couple from, we had just some random guy from Florida. No, I'm kidding. I love my brother from Florida there, Kevin and Miranda. And then another sister from Chapel Hill. But the long short of it is, we moved here to Charlotte because a dream popped up of like, hey, we see God's call to action. We see those saints who went before us on the bus that went and did the whole, we're going to go and see what God's going to do. And we're going to live together and see what God's going to do. And we wanted to do that together out of college. And so a lot of us just moved to Charlotte without a job. But we decided we'd find a job whenever we got here, or some people did have jobs, don't worry. But we had a heart to see God's name grow on UNC Charlotte's campus, because a few exploratory trips, we realized like there was not a large Christian presence on UNC Charlotte's campus, and there was a deep hunger and desire for it. And we prayed about it for a couple of years and saw God move there. But the most difficult part of that transition was, in the sense, leaving family behind, because I didn't grow up a Christian. I went to school at NC State in Raleigh, and that's where I came to Christ. That's where I finally found a family, because I'd been moving around my whole life. I didn't really understand what it meant to have like deep roots, I suppose, in an area. But I experienced that for the first time with my church family there in Raleigh. And so it was really difficult to say, oh yeah, we're going to move away from all of the familiar. But a promise that we held on to, I know I did, and I shared it with our church, is like, hey, you will not, some of you will leave brothers and sisters and children and fathers and lands, and you will be rewarded with 100-fold that in this lifetime, and along with persecutions, along with eternal life through Jesus Christ. And just a promise there that we were moving not away. We weren't leaving our brothers and sisters behind permanently. It's not like, oh no, it's 2 hours away, like 2.5 hours away. We can drive there. We can go and see them. We got this, we can call them. But we were in fact just really letting go of what we had, in a sense of this close-knit church, and we decided we're going to be the church together. And it was really difficult, but it was really rewarding, in the sense that a lot of us grew really close together and understood, wow, this close-knit relationship that we have now is really impacted our lives forever. And there's more to say, but the promises definitely outweigh like, I guess the rewards that God has shown in our lives since then has really outweighed the trepidation, the fear of coming from the beginning.
Yeah. Wow. So it sounds like you're saying you knew it was going to be difficult because there are no jobs, trying to find a new place, new city to live in, but you also knew the vision and what you were going after, and that
Yeah.
was totally worth it.
Yeah. And I mean, we understood that God's desire was for the earth, and we were going to go to the ends. Jerusalem, Samaria. This is kind of our Samaria, right? So that was really, really cool. A really cool
Yeah.
opportunity.
So what do you think God got to reveal about yourself, or even about his vision for the world through that transition?
That is an excellent question, Lee. Really, I think all of us realized how dependent we were on God, because we had beforehand we bathed the time in prayer, and throughout the very beginning of the we realized, like, if we weren't praying, we weren't seeing action happen, and we needed to rely upon God to see work happen. And we were committed to going on campus, and those of us looking for jobs, we were committed to looking for a job to sustain ourselves. And it was really like, all right, God. I remember just like praying. It was after 3 months of not finding a job, and just praying, all right, God, I have seen you come through in the past. I need you to come through now, because rent's coming up and I don't have money, So yeah, that was a really, really good time.
Wow. So looking back on that, this is a few years ago, what would you tell someone who is considering doing something like that, like moving to another city or making a big change like that?
I would say make sure you have a network, because if you're going to try to do something on your own, make sure you're connected with your church body, because together, it's like the coal analogy in the fire pit, right? You have a bunch of coals and they're going to burn hot together, but if you remove one coal, like, it could be right in the middle of the fire pit and be the hottest burning one, but if you remove it, it's going to cool down real fast. So make sure that you're keeping together. That's the biggest the biggest thing I would say to someone.
Yeah, that is huge.
Yeah.
Huge. And this idea of mourning a transition has come up, and I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on, like, what did it look like to mourn your move from Raleigh to Charlotte, and or have you been able to? Is that even a thought that you've had?
I don't know if we specifically took time out to mourn it, but we expressed that beforehand and during the beginning of the time, like within the first year. All of us talked through, like, how is it different? How is it stacking up? There was that excitement right at the beginning, but like a year later, how are we coping? How are we dealing with this? What have we been holding on to? And we kind of had like a set. It was almost like, not, I wouldn't say a grief share session, but like hey, we're sharing like this that's been on our hearts. And then afterwards, we all were just like, it's almost like a psalm, like, God, why have you, like all these, like these different things, but at the end, yet my hope will be in the Lord. And all of us turned to the Lord's scripture, and we really were like, okay, we're going to hold on to these things. And not to say like all of a sudden it was done, it was a one and done thing. No, like, all of us in different times and different processes have brought these things up, and praise the Lord, we're all close and we're all open, in the sense that, like, you can express how you feel, as long as you are willing and open to hear it, and to also say, hey, like, what's the truth? Like, let's reflect on the truth. So that's been one of the main things that we've been doing.
Yeah, that's really cool. So it sounds like having a place where you can share,
Yeah.
these are things that I'm grieving,
Yeah.
but also not just stopping there, but moving to making sure you're holding on to truth.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Daryn.
Of course.
Hey, we'll come back to you in a little bit. We are going to look at this transition of going from a job to a new job. And Carlos is going to share some, and maybe Carlos, to start us off, you can kind of share, what job did you have and what did you transition to? And then we'll get into difficulties.
Thank you. For me, the job that I used to have was I was an import export. I had been in that field like practically my whole life. my life. My dad was a trucker, and he went from trucking to importing and exporting from the U.S. to Honduras. So it kind of like went from driving the containers and then shipping out containers. Um, I was with him for like practically all my life, but it just came a point that I decided to like transition, and I had an amicable transition to like another company. I did import export, and kind of like was working in that position. So I kind of like was in the real world in the secular field for a good season until I got kind of like asked from the church that I'm at to see if I could help out in different areas. So I got when I got married, because I got married, kind of like my ministry time was kind of decreasing, and I was like taking some decisions here and there and leaving things in place to like not be in charge of some things. And as I was doing that, the pastor and a deacon approached me and asked me, "Hey, we're seeing that a possibility of you coming on staff and maybe taking care of all those things that you're kind of letting go of." Because I was in the new job, and that was demanding more of my time, and I was married too. Mostly because I was married, I was kind of decreasing my time in ministry to like around 50%. So my transition happened like that. It became like a year-long conversations with pastor and deacon to kind of create this role in which I would help with miscellaneous things that I was taking care of beforehand, and kind of formalizing those things into youth ministry and ministry with people, some administrative things, some communication things, and then still leave some space for some just informal ministry I used to do. And that's what a transition looked like. So that took like a year transition, and I've been on my 4 years of staff since then.
Yeah, wow. So it sounds like you were doing some of the things already, and then as you were stepping back, there's like, oh man, there's a need there. How can we? And you're a good person for that. What was difficult about stepping back from the import-export world and stepping into a world with ministry?
For me, the most difficult things for me were I think it is a bit of a kind of like a world of difference, like the secular field to like the ministry field, and people might not know that. So I think for me, like one of the most things that was difficult for me is like order. Got to have order, and when you're in a secular field, it was mostly like a 9 to 5 job, and after 5 p.m. you could linger on, but there was not a lot that I could do at home. It wasn't a remote job, which is probably a different category, but when you're in ministry, especially if like you have any concern for souls or anything, like you're kind of like get into a 24/7 kind of mode. So placing boundaries, I would look for pastors or look for resources online that would help me to like give order and place boundaries. Some of the things I was able to talk with Pastor Matt at a time, or learning from Pastor Matt's seminars, learning from people online that had their lives pretty organized. I'm not very much like an organized person, so needing to like place order in that aspect was pretty helpful for me. That was one of the most biggest things that I needed to focus on.
Yeah.
And inside of that, I would say organizing time with family and making sure you're allotting the right time to ministry, but also without neglecting some other areas of your life. Because if you've seen people in ministry before, you kind of see that can become like a blind spot. You don't want that to happen.
Right. Right. So it sounds like you're saying that in your import-export work, it was kind of organized in that you could only work this time. Outside of that time is more difficult because other people weren't available. But then when you got into ministry, it's like, oh man, all of a sudden things are wide open, and you've got to learn how to put those guardrails, put those boundaries up, so that and it's a whole new set of skills that you've got to learn, because you didn't have to do that earlier. Now it is something that you've got to learn how to do. What do you feel like God has shown you about himself or about you through that transition?
About himself or about myself is I would say about him and the transitions has been how he is worth trusting. And the more that you trust him in the transitions, like kind of like you get more confident about it. I think when earlier, like in my early 20s, it was more hard to trust him. But then afterwards, when you get to like, in a sense, get to see God's character as you're going through this transitions, you see like, okay, a lot of the freaking out is mostly from me. Like I'm freaking out about this transition. It's not really, God is in control. God has a way out. And there's a quote that I think about from this guy. It's not Christian, but Seneca is an old philosopher, and he said that most people suffer in their imagination more than do reality. So that I translate to like, I need to make sure that I'm not just anxious for nothing, and actually spending my time trusting on God. So I think as you grow older, you kind of like, you get more confident about that, and you kind of get more of that groundedness that you see in Christian men as
Yeah.
years go on, to like
Yeah.
trust the Lord. So that would be something that he showed me about myself,
Yeah.
about him, how he's worth trusting.
So it sounds like you almost had to learn how to identify that you were worrying so that you could tie it down to truth, so that it wasn't constantly over your head. Because you have to know what you're worrying about in order to place truth onto it. So,
Constant work of that.
yeah. Wow. And then again, this area of grieving, do you feel like that's something that you've thought about? What did that look like for you?
That's interesting, because honestly, in that aspect of grieving, you don't think that much about grieving when it comes to these kind of transitions. So I'm really glad that you kind of brought that angle, because I thought, wow, that's very interesting to actually even bring up that word, because honestly, even I've gone through grieving in the past, and I feel like that has been I'm going through some different transitions right now that I can put the label of grieving, and we should put grieving to people, not to situations. But and I thought that you made, when I was thinking about that, and hearing that question right now, I was like, grieving is about loss, about losing something, not necessarily about people. And these events, kind of, we have to make sure we're kind of leaving that behind. And it's healthy. I'm a very emotional person, and I have to kind of remind myself that it is healthy to grieve, but it is also, I don't want my emotions to make me look back that much and think like, did I make a mistake? Did I forget about what God did there? So I think like when we transition and make decisions to transition, make sure that we know like, okay, God is leading me in this direction. And like you said before, I'm kind of grounding myself in truth. So when my emotions make me like kind of like lost wife, kind of look back and say, did I make the right decision and everything? Like, hey, listen, God is in this. Make sure I know what truth I think that God has led me to, or what truth I have that has been the wisdom for me to make this transition. So that has helped me out a lot. So in different transitions, that would be helpful. But in my aspect, I thought I'm very idealistic, and I went from a secular job to a ministry job. And in that aspect, I felt you go more into your passion and what you desire, which most people who are on staff ministry is their passion. But then I got sobered up by understanding how even in your passions, there's going to be understanding that, man, it's going to be hard to deal with people. You're going to still deal with hard tests and with hard situations.
Yeah.
But in that sense, that kind of prepared me in that transition. But in that particular situation, I wouldn't say there was a lot of grieving, because I transitioned to something I was passionate about. So, but in some senses, I kind of lost. I kind of threw myself in that, and that didn't allow me maybe to grieve that transition as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Really cool. Thanks for sharing that. I think for me, kind of similarly, I was in a secular job. I worked as a civil engineer, like I hinted at earlier. And I loved my job. I worked down in Fort Lauderdale, worked as a water treatment engineer, and it was really fun. I got to work on cool projects. My company really liked me. I had good mentors that were helping me grow. Um, in the back of my mind, I had this idea of like, okay, well, maybe going on staff with my church could be something that I would do. But it definitely wasn't the only thing that I was thinking about. It's like that was an option, but there are other things. But eventually, I became part of a young professionals group where I like visited it because I had some friends that were going, and it was awesome. It was like a Christian young professionals group where these people that were in my stage, they were like trying to follow after Jesus, and they were doing it together. And so I kind of like worked my way into the leadership team because I wanted to learn what they were doing and be a part of it. And eventually I got to be a part of helping kind of coach the small group leaders in our little group. And I loved it. It was like so fun to be able to keep vision in front of people and remind them why it's important that we're loving God and loving each other. And I think something kind of came up as like, oh man, if I were to go on staff with my church, I would be doing this significantly more. And it's something that I really enjoy. And it was like a highlight of my week. And so I was kind of doing some of it I knew I would be doing more if I was on staff. And it was a very difficult decision because it wasn't like, oh, this is a good decision and this is a bad decision. It was like, no, I like engineering, but I also like what I'm doing here with these small group leaders, or what I would be doing back on campus in Tallahassee. And it took me about 9 months to wrestle through, okay, God, should I do this? Should I do this? And eventually I felt like he was telling me, he's like, Lee, you're young and you can take risks. It's okay, you should go. And I was like, okay, like, here we go. And so I told my job, I'm going to be leaving. I'm going back to Tallahassee. And they're like, all right, we'll see you later. So I raised support and came back on staff. And I think one thing that has been really difficult about that change, and kind of similar to what you're saying, Carlos, is that like I went from a place where engineering projects, like I would get one, I would work on it, we would see it built, and then I would move to another one. Like literally, you would see the progress and you would see it come to a completion, and then you would be done with it and you would move to another one. And with moving into the job that I have now with ministry, I'm working with people and I'm working with unfinished products always. We are always working to be more like Christ. And so I think how God's shown himself to me and more about me is actually my old roommate. He told me, he's like, hey, Lee, there are seasons for everything. And there's a season for the work that you have. There's a season for maybe the job that you have, but there's also a season for the friendships that you have. And you cannot like say, oh, just because I may not know this person for the rest of my life, I shouldn't give time towards them. He's like, no, you have this season with them. God gave you this season to be able to build relationship with them, to be able to care for them, to be able to allow them to care for you. And so I feel like I go back to that idea pretty often, because especially I work with college students all the time. People are graduating, people are moving to a new city, and I don't see it as, oh, well, I won't have them as a friend for the rest of my life. I see it as, oh man, in this season, I have them as my friend and I get to be a part of their life. And God has allowed that to happen. He's crossed our paths. And so I think if I was to talk to someone about who is thinking about going through a job change, I would just challenge them like, man, we have a season for everything, including relationships. And so don't hold back because you know you might change something in the future. Like, allow the people around you to know that you love them and you're for them, and you're not kind of always in limbo, always ready for change, but that you're with them and that you're for them. So kind of part of my story. We are going to move into transitions from singleness to married, which is a pretty huge transition. And we're going to let Chrissian Potter share a little bit of his experience. Chrissian, maybe you can summarize where you're at right now, where you've come from in the last year, and then get into what's been difficult and what God's been showing you.
Yeah, so I met my wife in April of 21. We got engaged June of last year, and then we got married November of last year. So we've been married for 6 months now. And I just realized each and every day just how dumb and naive I am to think that I know so much, because I wake up every day and the Lord humbles me. And but yeah, I think one of the coolest things is that, and you know, I'm speaking from a guy that's really only 6 months in, but I think one of the coolest things is that, like, being able to see God's design of marriage and like a firsthand experience is like the really coolest thing. I think like a lot of times when you're in that singleness, we hear it preached from the pulpit. We see it in scripture. We see the intricacy of like how God designed it. But I think like when you get a firsthand glimpse, you see like the beauty that God crafted it. Like, you just, when you're in marriage, especially like as a Christian, like, you can see that this is not a man-made thing. This is definitely a God-made thing. This is God designed. And so, yeah, I think like these 6 months, I've definitely appreciated all the humility that the Lord has given me. But I think more so it's seeing, like, we read in scripture how God designed marriage, like in Genesis, like when he talks about, it's like it's only so many verses, but like it's so much more than that, right? Like God just put it in these small verses. Like we have to understand it so much more, and like it's just crazy to think how it through marriage I'm seeing just how big God is, and how sovereign he really is. So it's been a blast. It's been a lot of fun. So
That's
yeah.
awesome. I appreciate that, Christian. That's really,
Yeah.
really cool. It sounds like you're saying like you get to see what God's designed and the beauty of it and how it fits
100%. Yeah.
together. Because yeah, we can read about it, but once you experience it, you're like, oh, that's what it's talking about.
Yeah,
That's how we
exactly.
get sharpened. That's how we get to experience God's love in a whole new way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. What would you say to someone who is transitioning maybe to marriage or thinking about marriage? What is something that was important that you had, that you would encourage someone else to have?
Man, I am really blessed to have men in my life that just like they're willing to tell, like, lovingly tell me that I'm wrong. And that I don't have like yes men in my life, right? Like I don't have men that, like, if I'm feeling some type of way, or like if there's a situation, like I'm telling them about it, like they're just like, oh yeah, no, you're right, bro, you're right, you're so right. It's like, one of the things like that I have is that I have men that, like, I can call, and their first reaction is never to tell me that I'm right or tell me that I'm justified. Their first reaction is to offer me perspective. Like they're like, okay, well, like, have you considered how your wife is seeing this, or have you considered how your wife is considering this, or thinking about this, or like what about her perspective? And like every single time it's like, oh, bro, like I did not think about that. I did not consider that. I'm not, doing that. And so I think it's really, really good because, again, like going back to this idea of like God's design for marriage, like a husband's biblically called to sacrificially love his wife as Christ loves the church. And like doing that, like the concept of that already is hard, right? Like I wake up each and every day, and I'm gonna wake up each and every day for the rest of my life and know that, like, I'm gonna need God just to do that. And like the way that God has positioned me to be able to do that is that he has blessed me with community, and he's blessed me with men that are in that season, that are in that position to offer me perspective. And so like I think of where I'm at now. And I think that like it's been such like a really good buffer to like have men that are never gonna tell me I'm great or tell me I'm justified. Like they love me, don't get me wrong, but their first reaction is always to make sure that remind me that I need to be considering my wife and her perspective, remind me that I need to be considering like what she's thinking about, how she's feeling. And it's just that's just like such a blessing that you can't put a price on.
Yeah, yeah. So having people that are willing to listen, but also willing to say, "Hey, you're not thinking about this correctly," or let's
Exactly.
get a
Yeah.
bigger picture of what's going on. Yeah, I think as we were talking a little bit about this earlier, I think you were mentioning, um, in singleness, you would come home and just kind of like have time to just check out and just be like, okay, I'm not going to talk to anyone. I'm just going to kind of do my own thing. But now that you're married, you get home and your wife's there and she wants to hear about your day. She wants to know what's going on. How
Yeah.
has that been a blessing and a challenge?
Yeah. First, like I'll start with the blessing is that, I come home now and there's not like this before being single, like I come home and I'm immediately all I'm getting from home is like a lot of physical rest, right? Like I'm just socially unplugging, physically unplugging. But I come home now and like there's a lot more than just physical rest for me. Um, I think that it's a beautiful thing that, like my wife has like made our house like a home. Like I come home and it's just like there's just like a lot of relief off my shoulders. Like um I know Andrew would be able to say my house was really a bachelor pad before I got married. Just a lot of things, you know. Let's just say that interior design is just not like my forte, and you know, God gave us women for a reason because I remember I would come home as a kid and like, man, my house felt real cozy, real homey. And I have not had that feeling since I moved out. And now I do. And I'm like, oh wow, this is a woman's touch. Um, and with that, you know, like the challenge is also like there's no coming home to like unplug like from everything anymore, right? Like I can't unplug I can't come home and just like be like, oh, I don't want to just not talk to people, or like I just want to like not like see anyone or anything like that. You know, I come home and like my wife could have had a rough day at work. My wife could have just like really missed me. And so like, you know, there's been times where like a challenge is that, you know, I have to not be selfish. Like there's a few days like that my wife has like come home from work, and I'll be playing video games, and like her expectation is like, hey, I came home from work, like we just did not spend like 8 hours together. Like, why are you not like ready to like talk about our days or anything like that? And so like it's been an adjustment to just be like, dude, like I'm not on my own time anymore. I have a woman that, you know, like has expectations of me, and like more than, you know, like that's the bare minimum. Like that expectation is like a bare minimum. Like she's not expecting me to like give her $1 million when she walks through the door, right? Like she wants my love and affection. And so um like figuring out like, okay, like I need to come home, but like there's an expectation of me, rightfully so. And like that expectation is a sharpening tool for me. Like that expectation is going to make me a better man. That expectation is going to make me a better discipler. It's going to make me a better friend. It's going to make me a better son. And so, yeah, I think a lot of it is coming home and like, you know, in singleness, like there's not like real expectations. Like I can only have expectations of myself when I'm single, but you know, coming home now and like when I am home, like there's expectations from another human being.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. So there's a lot of blessings, and also some like you get to adjust your life to be working and be loving another one that loves you and wants to be with you.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. That's really cool. How about you, Carlos? You were mentioning even earlier, you're like, man, when I got married, a lot of things had to pull back. I didn't have time here. So can you explain maybe summary of where things are at with going from single to married, and then some of those difficulties and what God showed you?
Yeah, for me, it's if I would say to somebody that's preparing to that transition, I would say, um, I remember when I was single, thinking about Spurgeon saying that marriage would be the great sanctifier, and that marriage is going to be helping me to become more like Christ. It's going to help my wife also to become more like Christ. And I wish also, I think it would have helped me a lot to think about transition, about how much this role was going to control my life. And I think about Ephesians 5 that says, in Ephesians 5, we do have that wives submit to your husbands, but we have like a chain of roles there. And all those, the role of husbands, wives, parents, children, then afterwards, employees and bosses, and all of them have to submit to a role. And I was surprised at how much I felt like I was submitting in a marriage, but I was not submitting to my wife. I was submitting to the role that God had for me. And I felt very, in a sense, like, that's very interesting that I feel controlled by this role, this new role that I have. And just like when we become Christians, we're controlled by this new role. We're submitting to this new role of fearing God and following Christ. And I felt the same way with marriage. And it's like, man, I do think that that's, for me, very helpful to think about. If I would have heard that while transition, is like, this is gonna control a lot of your life. So I kind of prepared my life in that season for that. Another thing that I think would be helpful in this transition would be the aspect of how this is. The Greeks had their four loves of eros, like this romantic love, this familial love, this friendship love, this natural love, and it's the aspect of how in marriage marriage is the only place where these loves coincide. I think C.S. Lewis made that point. That and one of the things that I enjoyed a lot has been the aspect of friendship in my marriage. And I've been surprised sometimes to talk to some of the people who have gone through that transition, and friendship is not a thing. So once romance can come and go, for different people it can be more, for different people it can be less. But when the romance is not there, I would I've noticed that some people didn't spend so much time becoming friends. And that natural love, I think, just is gained by just spending so much time together. So for me, as for somebody that just transitioned, I would tell them something along those lines about spend time becoming friends, spend time enjoying to be together, investing yourself in oneness is part of like glorifying God in marriage. And man, investing yourself in oneness, taking decisions and planning in your life. And that's something that I one of the things that when I was getting married, and I saw from your life, Lee, was like you had some planned dates and some plans time together, and that's been like we've been able to learn some ways, some steps that we can like invest in the oneness of our marriage and not get lost after different things come in, projects like financial projects or other projects of life or kids, that oneness is lost. And hearing those warnings from those people that are in that transition of they becoming empty nesters and seeing what is left in their home, and hearing that kind of wisdom and kind of saying, okay, how can we architect in the past right now to kind of not allow that to not fall into those pitfalls in the future. Those are helpful things for those kind of transitions.
I appreciate that, Carlos. So it sounds like you're saying that one, you've got to put time towards building that friendship with your wife, because there are other things going to pull for it. But if you don't have that foundation of friendship, marriage is going to be pretty difficult, because romance will come and go. There'll be times that are easier, times that are harder. But if there's friendship or there's a foundation that's built, it makes it so much easier to keep going or to enjoy the life or the marriage that God's given you. Wow.
I've noticed involuntarily how much that helps out. Because then when you're doing different things at home, you don't kind of like, you're not annoyed as easily with a friend. You're doing things together. Or one of the things that I've noticed also has been, you don't argue with each other. You don't try to, with a friend, you're not arguing on so much on who is right, but you're discussing on how can we do something that is right, instead of like saying like who is right. And that has been helpful. Like friendship and that aspect, godly friendship, has been like so helpful in a lot of areas that we didn't think about beforehand.
Yeah. Wow. What do you think, again, getting back to this grieving singleness to and then celebrating marriage, how has that played a role in these last few years? Because I mean, like you said, like marriage takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of focus, and it's like a life of submitting to what God's called you to do as a husband. So what has grieving looked like?
I think in for somebody in transition, I would say for a Christian man to understand that it's going to make you more like Christ, and that dying to yourself means that you're giving yourself off to others. And I would say that requires a bit, for as a man, I think that requires a little bit more effort than a woman, just because we're different in nature, and women can be sometimes more giving, more agreeable. They have kids and they give themselves up in a very natural way. And I think for us as men, I feel like I need that additional reminder that I need to be putting my life down for this home as well. And I need to embrace those kind of things. Lessen the time that I spend on my own self. And I think the idea of like Christ likeness and self-sacrifice goes with the role of like being a husband and being a father, and welcome those aspects of that, because it's for our benefit and not, I think it glorifies God when we welcome that. It kind of seems a little bit unmanly and begrudgingly or ungrateful when we do it in a different way, and we feel like it's a drag. And I think we glorify God by being joyful on these gifts towards us. So that's one. Wow.
So it's almost like you're given more opportunities to be the man God's called you to be as you step into marriage, because it's very obvious. It's very like, here's an opportunity, walk in it or don't, or fall on your face. Like there's an opportunity to love your wife. Yeah. One
thing that I've seen recently is finding the contrast of the Proverbs 31 woman, because like we have for women, we have like the Proverbs 31 thing, and I was like, where is the contrast for men, you know? And is there a chapter or passage that can help me out with that? So I think about my wife reminded me at a point of Psalms 112 on how there is a man there that is righteous, that trusts God, and that does not fear the future. Their heart does not fear when sudden things come. And Psalms 112 has a lot of features, and kind of finding, okay, we have Christ, but I'm thinking to myself, what other practical steps? Like the women have Proverbs 31. Is there anything here in the scripture that can help me out? Psalms 112 helps out with that.
Yeah, that is awesome. Thanks, Carlos, for sharing. This kind of moves us into a transition to being married to then having kids, which brings us another level of transition and amount of time that family takes. So, Daryn, I would love to hear how that transition has been for you.
Yeah, no, out of all of the transitions we have gone over, this one has been the most difficult for myriad of reasons. It's like I feel like I'm a selfless, humble guy before I'm married, and then all of a sudden I get married and God humbles me and says, no, you're not, remember? And then you have kids and you're like, oh, wait, even less, like it's what Carlos just voiced of just like, oh, even less of the time that I think I have is mine. Like, oh no, I don't. It's not mine. Like it's all the Lord's. Remember, and He's given you these blessings, and it's been really. I say it. Going from being married to having children. We've been married for 5 years, and our oldest is about to turn 4 in like a week. So we've had kids for a long time. Most of our marriage, obviously. But it's been a really, really cool experience to slow down. I think back to your question on grieving. And I think by that time, a couple of our friends had this idea of like, look, yes, you're looking forward to having your kid, but appreciate where you are now. You're never going to be here again. Remember that. Like, remember where you're at now. And with those big life changes, it's really changed our perspective of like, yes, we're looking forward to meeting our baby. And yet now, as whenever we were just with just the two of us, Lauren and I, it was like, okay, let's appreciate this now. We're not going to be able to do all these different things anymore. And then whenever we went from 1 kid to 2 kids, it's like, all right, well, we're not going to be able to have this one-on-one time anymore. And then 2 kids to 3 kids, it's like, okay, well, we're not going to be able to have this like man on man, defense anymore. And so it's been a really cool journey to see how God has really I think opened my eyes to see, wow, like I did not think I had the capacity to love this much. Yeah, just to be very blunt in it. Like, I figured I'd be able to be an okay, husband, by myself, and then God would bump me up, and I didn't think I'd be a good dad because I didn't have the best example growing up. I don't know who my real dad is, and the man who I call my dad, I met when I was 5. He and my mom got divorced 5 years later, but I didn't have a good example until again, church family, went to church and like realized like I started getting connected with not just Burke and Ed and the other fathers and mothers, the families in Raleigh, but the families all across what was the GCC network, now a C1 network, but it's been a really cool experience to say, oh wow, God, just because my experience was rough or wasn't the best doesn't mean you can't use me to really raise up godly children. You can't redeem my life in a sense. Like He's redeeming my experiences to say, look, yeah, like it's like the cross, right? It's a act of death of what we see is like, oh, when before Christ, it's like, oh, that's the worst. But after Christ, it's like, oh, that's the best. We get to worship the Lord our God because of the cross. That's a redemption act right there. And that's what God, I feel like, did with my life in being a father, because I'm like, I'm totally unfit for this, but the Lord is fit in me and I'm trusting in Him to do all the work, and it's really fun. So
yeah, wow. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. I appreciate that. What do you feel like God has shown to you about Himself in that transition from going to, all right, it's me and Lauren, to,
Yeah.
all right, it's me and a bunch of us, and we have got our minds full.
It's actually funny. It's a funny thing to miss. I didn't realize. I was like, God. I'm just gonna say, God has used families for centuries to impact the world. And I just kind of glossed over that while reading the Bible, the scriptures. I don't know, the Abrahamic promise, I will use your family to be a blessing to all the earth. And I just thought, what? Oh, my children too. Oh, yeah. And then just all of a sudden, when becoming a dad, I'm like, oh, wait, oh, Deuteronomy. Oh, yeah, like, teach them diligently to your children to, just pass these things on. Oh, yeah, you will be blessed to your children's children. Oh, my goodness, God, you really want to bless the earth through children and through families. Ah, man. Wow, dang, I totally just missed it, but it just seems so obvious now. But that's how God really has revealed his heart to me. It's like, wait, like having kids is a blessing. Like I've always thought of having children as a blessing. It's not just another pastime. I'm not having kids because I'm free on Friday night. No, your life is going to be changed, right? Like you're not going to do that, all that kind of stuff. But wow, God, you really, it's not just a blessing to me, it's a blessing to the earth. Like I can praise you, and I can pray and ask God, please use these children to be a blessing to not only my family who don't know Christ, but to the families surrounding us in our neighborhood, to the city, to the nation. Like, God, use them to do great and mighty things, do greater works than I, God. And just awesome prayers to be able to pray. And it's just really fun because I'm like, oh wait, this is your heart, God. So yeah.
Here we go. Yeah, that is awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, I think for Hanley and I, we've got 3 kids, and having young kids is an intense time. Like, it is just very engaging, and there's a lot to do all the time. A lot of attention that's needed. And God has allowed our family to grow through fostering. And we've got Luann and Kaylee and Timo right now. And it's been really, really sweet to see just like getting to be family together. And I think originally stepping into it, I was like, okay, like we can do still a good amount. We're able to like be where we used like do a lot of things that we couldn't do before. But pretty quickly it started like, okay, we've got nap times, we've got feeding times, we've got all these things that it's like, okay, we're maybe our time is more focused. And I think what was really helpful was realizing that like one, our kids are our disciples. Like we get to raise them up as lovers of Jesus, and they get to see that in their parents. And I think that is a really awesome, and I hold on to that for sure. But I think another step to that is that like the people that are observing our life are getting to see family done. Like they're getting to see family. And I think I would say most of the people in our church would say that maybe like they don't have the best example of what it looked like to grow up in family. And unfortunately, that's true for a lot of students in college right now. And so getting to be a family in front of others, like we have dinner at our house on Friday nights. And if you're here on Friday nights, like it's pretty crazy. Like we'll be having food, and we'll have tables and chairs and people are eating, and then I'll kind of like almost disappear for about 30 or 40 minutes, and I'm bathing our kids, get them pajamas, get them in bed, and then I'm like watching doors to make sure people are going to sleep, making sure. Anyways, but at first I was like, man, this is like stinks. Like I'm supposed to be sitting there next to this person, talking to them, asking them a meaningful question. But the reality is that's not where we're at. Like I can't do that right now. But realizing that they're getting to see me, and it is like they're getting to see patience, hopefully. They're getting to see like a dad who loves his kids, but is also like there are times where it's really hard. It's like, whoa, you need to listen and you need to do what I'm saying. And they're not. And so how am I responding? And like I almost sometimes can feel on Friday night that it's almost on display, like my being a father. It's like, okay, they're gonna see me walk through some difficult times. And so realizing that like my kids are my disciples, but also the people that I'm discipling are going to see family and be a part, even feel a part of family, because we're getting to be dad and mom around them. I think that has been super, super cool. And I think getting back to again how God sees me through parenting, like what I've gotten to learn, like I get to take my kiddos on a date on Friday mornings. I take one of them on a date, and it's like the highlight of their month. Like it's what they talk about, and we literally just go out and we get a donut, and then we go to a park and like we made feed some ducks or like go for a walk, and it's like an hour maybe, but that is like their highlight. They love it, and I love it too, and I love getting to see them delight in that. And I think what I've realized is like God loves to be with us, and he loves to see us delight in things like my kids love donuts, and it's because on our date I get them a donut and they get to pick, like it's usually the pink one with sprinkles, but they pick that donut. And I think the same way God loves us and he wants to see us delight, and he wants like that same there's actually someone in your church, Daryn, Vanna. She, I asked her to paint a picture for me, and it's of the prodigal son father, and this idea that the father in the prodigal son, he like said, "All right, you can go. Like take half the inheritance, you can go." But he's back in the farm. He's working, and the picture that she painted for me was the father working in his workshop, and he's looking up kind of down his driveway, like in expectation that his son might come back, in expectation that like he's not going to run after him, he's not going to say, "Hey, you need to come back, what are you doing?" He's saying, "No, when you do come back, I'm going to be right there for you." And that face of like, "Oh, I'm hoping he's going to come back," is that face that God has for us, and the face that I get to have for my kiddos. Like, I want to be with you. I'm excited for you to step my way so that I can come and just give you a hug. So that picture of God has become so much more real as I get to see that in my kids. It's just been really, really sweet.
That's dope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, I saw Andrew, thanks for posting a question. I thought it would be cool before we jump into that question. Is there any final thoughts, Daryn, Carlos, Christian, that you wanted to share? Just this idea of transitions in a godly life, how God uses those to really grow and challenge us. Any closing thoughts before we jump into some questions?
I mean, I shared mine already. I think is just appreciate where God has you now and look forward to the future excitedly. Like, yes, you're going through a transition, whether it's, the 4 that we listed out, they could be something different, but understand that in big things like this, you'll never be where you're at now again. So appreciate that and look forward to the future, because man, it's glorious when we can read Revelation all day and just love that. So
That is awesome.
For me, I think like for me is now I'm having 2 little ones, a toddler and a baby. And for me, if this was for a single man, I would say try to be the healthiest man that you can be, the most God-fearing man that you can be. And I love the aspect of C1 and how they want healthy churches and they want healthy leaders. And I've been now having a family and looking for reasons about family. I've come to see how healthy families are what makes healthy churches. And I read a quote from somewhere of a ministry focused on healthy people will make healthy families that make healthy churches. And how healthy churches are consisting of healthy families. As a single man, I did not have that vision. I came to the Lord had to like teach me what that vision was for family. And I think when as a single man, I was very much focused on ministry. and focusing on serving. And I thought kind of like that was the end goal. And God has taught me through the years how much the end goal is at home. And there is a brother that has engraved this in my head. And he has said that the way that I help out my church the most is by focusing on my family. And that has helped me out tremendously. And as a single man, I also was kind of like in Daryn's position, like saying, I don't know how to be a man, and I don't know how to have a household. I don't know how to do any of these things. How do I do this? And how can I get to be? I remember somebody asking a pastor, how do I get to be a man of gravitas? I feel like I feel so flimsy and not really there and insecure and weak. How do I get to be a man? And he was saying, talking to the pastor, I'll get to be a man like you with gravitas, with seriousness. And that is developed by fearing the Lord. And that is not something, that's not an area of a character we skim through. Deep time with God, deep times in the scriptures, minds on the scriptures, and a fear of the Lord that you can skim through as a Christian man. So focusing on making ourselves healthy will help us to have healthiness all around us in a different context.
That is awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Carlos.
Yeah, I would say I was having a conversation with a close friend of mine last night, and he was just reminding me how much of the Christian faith like is this idea of surrendering to Christ, and like how that's like one of the best things we can do. I would say like a healthy perspective of transition is that we have a new opportunity in a new area in our life to surrender over to God.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I think my closing thoughts would be like realizing that everything is in a season, and we shouldn't wait for the next season to start living. Like we get to live right now in this season, and even realizing that like the things that God has in our life, I think particularly with having kids, it's like that is part of what God's going to use to raise up disciples, and with your kids, but also with others. And so realizing he is very aware of the season that we're in, and we got to be intentional, knowing that, oh, we shouldn't just wait until the next season or what's coming next. It's right now. God's got you right where he wants you, because he has a heart for this world, and he wants everyone to know his love so they can be restored back to him. So good. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. We are going to jump into some questions. Andrew posted one. I'm going to read it, and then you guys can respond. It says, finances are a big stressor in transitions. How do you balance faith decisions with financial considerations? Also, several of you mentioned the importance of friendship or network. How can you prioritize relationships in the midst of transition? So let's talk about finances first. How do you guys consider faith decisions and financial considerations?
Well, I think actually Carlos mentioned it, like being the best man you can be now as a single man. And as a single man, I grew up, I grew up poor, basically. And so coming into college and understanding biblical finances and understanding like, hey, these are the things, this is the way that God wants us to spend our money. Are we investing in the kingdom, that kind of thing? And it wasn't like all of a sudden after college I got a great job and I was, making tons of money. No, I was like working minimum wage after getting 2 degrees at NC State. So like let's go, baby. And I was just like, okay, well, I'm going to honor God in what I have. And I would give as much as I could. I would, and that included time, not just money. And that really influenced how I viewed finances going forth throughout the rest of my life, because I had really good examples, really good opportunities for me to see God provide where it was safe, and while I was back in Raleigh, where I had a network of people who would care for me, I had opportunities for God to provide, whether it was like all of a sudden just a windfall, or wait a second, I miscalculated my finances and I have more money than I thought I did, or wait, how did, a friend of mine was like, hey, Daryn, I just wanted to support you here. And I'm like, not on staff. What do you mean support me? And they're like, what, you're doing a lot of stuff. I'm like, okay, sure. But so examples through there, like my car broke down and friends were like, hey, use my vehicle. I don't need it for the entire summer. Are you kidding me? Okay. Like, like, those types of opportunities where God used his church, used like kind of miraculous things. Like I still consider the times where I've like, I don't have any money in my account. Where did it come from? Like, okay, God, what did you do? Those kind of times to sustain me through those transitions, because moving without a job to a place where I had some savings built up, but like 3 months without a job, paying 3 months of rent, I was like, oh, well, God, you got to provide because I don't have it. And I had opportunities to trust in God before, so I trusted in him then. Getting married, having kids, like I realized like, oh man, I worked at Chick-fil-A whenever I was married and had our first kid. And I'm like, we're paying for this whole thing out of pocket. All right, God, let's see what you got. Like, I know you can do this. So it was definitely an opportunity to be a stressor, 100%. And yet, because of my past experience with just seeing God come through and understanding the truth of like, even if God hadn't come through, he's still God. Like, even if I had fallen flat on my face, God's still going to be glorified, whether it's through my life or not. Like it was, but I mean, it's like but even if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but even if God doesn't, he's still Lord. We're not going to worship. We're not going to bow down to this. Like, I'm not going to bow down to money. I'm going to worship the Lord. And it's been a really good opportunity of casting that vision before my family as well. It's like, hey, we're going to give as much as we can, even through all these different transitions. So that helped a lot, and it has continued to help, because it's like, oh sweet, we have more money. Like just the other month at the beginning, we miscalculated our budget in the sense that I'm making more money than we thought, and we're like, yes, we can give more. Like, yeah, like that. It was like because we've been praying, God, we want to give more. We want to be able to give, like, to like have special needs and special opportunities funds. And it was like, oh, look at that as an answer to prayer. So we like, yeah, God's been very, very gracious. I'll just say that.
That is so cool. That's cool to hear those testimonies. Carlos, what would you say?
I think for us, I think like there's still, I think I've appreciated God in the aspect of stability. I think there's a lot of room for us to grow in different areas, but the stability has come from just like God is a God of order. Be proactive, be planning, be preparing. I am not orderly. God and Jessie, my wife, are way more orderly than I am. So welcoming that kind of order and structure to, like, I know that finances can bring stress to a wife and to kids and everything. So being proactive and having some structure there, some budget that is within, like, with some space in that budget that something is going to be left over. So kind of like sounds like what Daryn is doing has been very, very helpful for us. Having and for us, a mentality that I kind of struggle with has been the war, kind of like a wartime mentality as Christians, that we kind of think of like frugality and use the money as much as possible for this, and not also having a balance of like how much money can I actually spend, so like enjoy my family and bless my family, and having a balance between those things of like, there's wartime mentality. Like, I want to be frugal. I don't want to do. I know that the mentality of God towards this earth has given me is like, this is temporary. We can only enjoy this as temporary things in a thankful way. So allowing my finances in that way, and then the other mentality of like, how can I bless my home so that my wife can enjoy themselves, and not feeling, that there's no joys in this earth at all, and raise up kids that feel like there's no joys in this world at all, but actually enjoying God's blessings with Thanksgiving, as He has called me to. So like a balance between those two things is some of the things that have helped us, but a budget is a work in progress all the time. And it's always like the time I invest, like spending on the budget and thinking about finances and everything is time well spent. Especially when you're as young as possible. I think something that a lot of Christian communities have learned about recently through like financial wisdom, Dave Ramsey is like, is preparing as much as possible for the future in regards to investments and stuff like that. That actually brings a lot of like more like, okay, there has been work done to stabilize and bring order to this home and the aspects of the future. Like it's in the scriptures, like the woman laughs at the future and the man prepares, and we're diligent industrious. It also comes into that end in the management. And I would say for men also, I'm not the best one, but I know it is my role to like manage the finances and bring my wife in as a support, but not lay that responsibility on her. But actually, like it is my and for men, I would say it is their main responsibility to like manage the finances, and it doesn't mean the wife can't support, but also like helping to bring that we are the source of that. We have take that role and that are the source of that stability and everything. So.
Wow. Thank you for sharing on that, Carlos. Christian, what would you say? Second half of Andrew's question was the importance of friendship and networks. How can you prioritize relationship in the midst of transition? Maybe you can share on how your relationships or friendships have been in the last year and how that has changed and how you've been able to prioritize them.
Yeah, I think as I've gotten older, you have to be extremely intentional with getting time with people in order to see them. Like, because in college, like you can just show up at a building and you'll see like 10 of your friends, and then you guys will like hang out till like 2 a.m, and then like it's a lot more easier to see your friends like on short notice or just like out of the blue. But honestly, like prioritizing it means it has to come with like a certain degree and a certain like level of intentionality on your end. And I think it's really important to stay intentional. Like even if you're just like, hey dude, like let's spend like 30 minutes on FaceTime. I have a friend that is doing missions overseas in Spain, and we're trying right now actively to just be on FaceTime together like once a month. And it's really good because like he's in a huge time of transition. Him and his wife just got there a month and a half ago. So they're there doing ministry now for the foreseeable future, and like it's good to encourage. It's good to be there for him, and I think also it just speaks to like the kind of friend group you have prior to that transition, like getting ready for that transition. Is that you want a high character friend group. You want people that you would hate to be in a position where like some of your friends are expecting a lot of your time. Like I think as you get older, like it's hard to just like, I don't put expectations on my friends to like give me a lot of their time, especially if they're married, if they have kids. Like a lot of the times when I'm like, hey dude, like what do the next 2 weeks look like for you? You know what I mean? Like I don't honestly like, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? Like that I really haven't had like that kind of flexibility in the last few years. So I think you want to be able to have friends that are going to be understanding of like the transition that you're going into. And maybe like, I'm not saying have a friend that like has been through that transition, but more so like a friend that's like, dude, like I understand that you are busy. I understand that other things have time, but like, yeah, I can take an hour to be on FaceTime for us to catch up, or like, yeah, dude, like let's go grab dinner, or let's go grab a lunch, or let's grab coffee. Like one of those things is just, in order to prioritize it, you have to have like a measured out level of intentionality. Is like, if that's for, and again, intentionality looks different. Sometimes for people, it's like, okay, on Sunday for 30 minutes, I'm going to go through my contact list. And if I want to see anyone in the next 2 weeks, like I'm just going to send them a text or something like that. For other people, it's like, hey, I'm going to write out a list of like people that I make sure I want to have FaceTime with like for this month. You have to figure out what level of intentionality works for you, but like you have to be willing to consistently make that step. You can't expect everyone around you to just know that you're in a transition and for them to reach out, because that's really self-centered, first of all. And then second of all is like, you're not taking into account like what transition they're going through either. So I think you just need to have like a very measured level of intentionality.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks, Christian. Yeah, I think I would maybe echo that a bit. I think you guys probably know this, but each of us are different and each of our friends are different than us. I know, it blows my mind too. But I think it came very real to me when I was in my transition from my job. And like I had a really good friend that we would hang out pretty consistently, but then I moved, and all of a sudden, like we didn't talk that much, we didn't connect that much, and it was like, oh, I'll call him and we'll like get to catch up. But then like a month will go by and I'll be like, he hasn't called me. And so I'd call him and we'd catch up, and I realized like God can put people on my mind. That doesn't mean he's putting me on their mind at the same time. And so I can love and serve them by initiating, by saying, hey, I'm going to love you, by reaching out and initiating. Because like you're saying, Christian, like we've got to be intentional. And if we're not, we can't expect someone else to, oh, they know exactly what Lee's going through, and so they're going to call me right at the right time. It's like, no, I know what I'm going through, and I can love someone and be known by someone by initiating that. So we gotta take ownership, knowing that we know ourselves and we get to bring the others in. So good. Well, I think that brings us to conclusion. Thank you guys for sharing. This has been really encouraging, and I'm really encouraged by just hearing what God's been doing in and through you guys through these transitions. So thanks for being here. Thanks for preparing and sharing your heart and your stories.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lee, and all the panelists. This was really great. I'm so encouraged too. Before we wrap up here, I want to share announcements for the people here and the people watching the recording. Something we're focusing on this year at C1 is making sure people are meeting together and doing life stuff together. So we have some like follow-up question discussion stuff prepared. I'm going to be reaching out, sending out some information where we can get some of the younger people together who are going through these transitions, so that you don't have to do it alone. You can do it with someone. You can continue the conversation. So keep an eye out for that. We also have on June 24th, our virtual life transitions workshop, where we'll be going over more of like the anatomy of a transition, the beginning, the middle, the end, and how to thrive through it, how to anticipate it and get ready for it. That'll be Seth Broadhurst is leading that. That's June 24th. It's going to be 10 a.m. to 2:30 Eastern time. And there'll be some teaching, which will be recorded, but there's also going to be a lot of discussion time. So if you can make it out, it's really going to be a lot more valuable to be able to be there, to be able to discuss and learn from Seth and all the great stuff that he has to offer. We do have a registration link that I'll put in the chat and also with the recording. It's free, but we want to know an idea of how many people are going to be there so we can prepare adequately and make sure we have good discussion times. And then the final thing is that we're looking for some feedback on these Zoom calls. Is these things people are interested in? Are there topics we haven't talked about that people are kind of waiting on? So I also have a form for that I'll put in the description of the video. So you guys, and in the chat, you guys keep an eye out for that. Let us know if you have any ideas. And you can always reach out to us as well and ask questions, of course. But thank you to everyone who came, to everyone who watched, and we're really excited to continue this conversation on the 24th and beyond that.